Coming back to life after loss does not mean pretending that those very hard, very true elements do not exist. It doesn't mean getting over it or moving on or arriving at some fixed state of I am healed now. To me, and to the hundreds and thousands of grievers that I've worked with, we all agree that coming back to life after loss means learning to live alongside the awfulness, the horror of what happened, to carry your loss with you in ways that are meaningful and sometimes bearable, and even occasionally on your best days, beautiful and meaningful to you. That is what rebuilding after loss, coming back to life after loss, actually looks like. Hi there, grief growers. I am so grateful to be here with you as always. If you've been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. And if you are new to me and my work, hello. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach, 3-time author, and the founder of Life After Loss Academy. I have had the distinct honor of helping thousands of grieving people stop feeling lost, stuck, broken, and alone, and start building lives that they genuinely love from the lives that loss forced them to live. This includes not only death-related losses, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, and any other loss that changes your life. Here on Grief Grower, we believe that grief is not something to get over. It is something that we grow with and alongside, and that by treating grief less like a problem to be solved and more like an invitation to live more deeply, we can create meaningful lives that are rich with the memories we carry, the struggles that we faced, and the precious awareness of what it is to be right here and right now. Now, on to today's topic. I really wanted to create an episode on how to come back to life after loss. This is a rebuilding guide for grieving people. My first podcast ever was called Coming Back, Conversations on Life After Loss, because I think a lot of people in our society ask, like, how do I come back to life after loss? Again, it's a very common question. And recently, a listener of Grief Grower emailed me after finding the podcast in the weeks following his son's death. He said, Shelby, I lost my son 3 months ago. He was 34. There was no warning. It was a heart attack in his sleep. I identified his body. I planned the funeral. I handled the insurance calls, the apartment, and his belongings. I did everything that needed to be done because someone had to, and I am his dad. Now that the dust has settled, I don't know what to do with myself. I wake up at 3 a.m. and can't go back to sleep. I cry in the car. I hold it together at work and fall apart the moment I walk through the door. Everyone keeps telling me I'm strong, but I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm just going through the motions of being alive. I found your podcast, Grief Grower, and I've been listening during my morning commute. It's the only time of day I feel like someone actually gets it. I guess my question is, how do I actually come back to life after something like this? Is that even possible? So if you are listening right now and you have asked yourself a version of that question, how do I come back to life after loss? Whether your loss is days old or weeks old or years behind you, this episode is for you. What I want to start with is a sort of disclaimer, the honest truth about coming back to life after loss, because coming back to life after loss is not what society portrays it as. In other words, coming back to life after loss is not a comeback story. The way society tends to frame it is you suffer, you heal, and then you emerge from the wreckage stronger, maybe with a fun sword in your hand. You're shinier, you're better than before. There is this narrative, I talk about it in my book, Of Course I'm Here Right Now. I refer to it as triumph porn, and it works beautifully in movies and memoirs and other forms of media, but for most grievers, it doesn't reflect reality. The truth of grief is that some things will always be real, will always be true about your loss. Some things that break your heart will never fully come together again or heal. There are absences and empty places that you will carry with you forever, whether that is at the dinner table or in the car or during the holidays or in moments where you least expect it. There are elements of your loss that will be as true in the future as they are today. And coming back to life after loss does not mean pretending that those very hard, very true elements do not exist. It doesn't mean, as we talk about so often on Grief Grower, getting over it or moving on or arriving at some fixed state of I am healed now. To me, and to the hundreds and thousands of grievers that I've worked with, we all agree that coming back to life after loss means learning to live alongside the awfulness, the horror of what happened, to carry your loss with you in ways that are meaningful and sometimes bearable, and even occasionally on your best days, beautiful and meaningful to you. That is what rebuilding after loss, coming back to life after loss, actually looks like. And in more than 10 years now of walking with grievers through devastating loss, I have noticed that rebuilding tends to follow a consistent pattern. This is regardless of the type of loss, the timeline since the loss, or the circumstances surrounding the loss. This pattern I have encapsulated into what I call my 5-step grief method. I've talked about it here on the show before, GRIEF. And this is the framework, the structure, the outline of my online course in Community Life After Loss Academy, which is the program that I teach and the live support group that I lead every single week. So here is what it looks like based on the grief method structure, GRIEF, to come back to life after loss. First, G, ground. Feel stable and safe again after loss. Because one of the first things that grief does to any of us is knocks the ground out from under us. Loss shatters the assumption that life is predictable and safe. Suddenly, a world that was relatively stable feels like a place where anything, including the worst thing, can happen at any moment. I often talk about in Life After Loss Academy that loss teaches us that anything can happen to anyone at any time for any reason or no reason at all. This is why so many grieving people describe the early days and weeks and months of loss as feeling untethered or adrift, like they're moving through life in a fog or going through the motions without really being present in any of them. I once had a student in Life After Loss Academy say, "It feels as if the ground is falling out from under me all the time." So before you can do anything else after a loss, the thing I teach is that you need to get grounded. This means creating small anchors like rituals or routines or sensory touchstones that help your nervous system, your literal body, remember that it is stabilized in this moment, even if the larger world feels unpredictable. And grounding does not, and probably should not, be elaborate. It might look like a cup of tea that you make the very same way every morning. It might look like a 5-minute grief ritual that connects you to your person who died or the thing that you lost. It might be a specific chair or a playlist or a corner of your home that feels like a safe or a stable enough place. It might be a daily practice like journaling or breathing or walking that signals to your body, you are here and you are okay in this moment. The goal of this first step, ground, is not to feel happy or all the way healed. It is simply to feel sturdy enough to keep going and to build a stable enough foundation that the deeper work of grief can eventually happen when you feel more ready. Number 2 in the grief framework is release, R. This is to let yourself actually feel and grieve your loss. Because grief is not just about the person or the thing that's gone. It is about everything that's attached to them. The future you imagined, the identity you built around them, the version of yourself that you were before loss steamrolled through, hopes, expectations, daily rhythms that made life feel like it belonged to you. All of those things deserve to be grieved and not just acknowledged once and filed away over there, but genuinely, messily, repeatedly felt and released. So the release step inside Life After Loss Academy is where I teach you how to give yourself permission to grieve the full scope of what's been taken from you. This includes creating rituals, so intentional acts of releasing, that honor what you have lost beyond just the loss itself. This step or this part in the course is often the hardest, according to Life After Loss Academy students, because it asks you to sit with the weight of grief instead of distracting from it or running away from it or pushing it down. It is an invitation, a very open invitation, to feel rage and guilt and sorrow and longing and despair without immediately trying to fix it or talk yourself out of it. It also asks you to grieve the person you used to be before loss changed you, because loss never just takes people and futures. It takes versions of who you are too. And that version of yourself, those many, many versions of yourself that can no longer be, deserve to have space to be mourned. Giving yourself real, intentional, mindful space and place to release grief's biggest and heaviest emotions, what that does is gradually shift the way your feelings move through you. They transform from things that knock you on your ass, pardon my French, to things that you can survive and process and carry forward. And in Life After Loss Academy, we talk about over and over again, the goal of releasing is not to feel your grief so that you can be done with it. It is to feel your grief so you can have a continual place for grief to go. It is to allow it to move through you over and over and over again, because so much of what society teaches us is to block against grief, is to push against it or to push it down or to file it away or to hide it out of sight from ourselves or from other people. And the release module is like, here, let's literally construct a place for grief to go through some sort of ritual, some sort of meaningful thing that has intention and purpose for you. And that's different for every student who comes through the course. And it's different for you and you're coming back. And depending on the loss as well, it can all change. So your ritual is very, very unique to you. And the goal of the release module is not to create the ritual so you do the ritual once and never have to do it again. It is so that each time this grief comes up, grief for the person you used to be, grief for the person you lost, grief for the life you can no longer have, grief for the future that can no longer be, you now have created a channel, a road that those feelings can go down so that they are not stuck existing inside of you. It is my all-time favorite section of Life After Loss Academy to walk with grievers through, because once you get through it, once you give grief a place to go, there's so much relief, there's so much opening, there's so much more space to do the other things that are necessary for coming back to life after loss. The third section in the grief method is integrate, and this is honor your loss while rebuilding your life. One of the most persistent myths about grief is that healing requires leaving the past behind. It does not. In fact, some of the most powerful grief work I have ever witnessed and had the honor of coming alongside people doing has happened not in letting go and never thinking of the loss again, but in weaving in. Integration of loss into life in a way that says, this happened, this person existed, this chapter mattered, this is part of my life, and I insist on carrying it with me. And integration looks different for everyone, but for you it might look like talking about the person you lost without apology or shame. It might be continuing a tradition or a ritual that connects you to your loss. It might look like folding in or even wearing meaningful symbols, objects, or dates into your life. It might look like allowing your loss to inform how you make decisions or form relationships or show up in the world, essentially for this loss to have some sort of meaningful legacy in your life. And what I want to stress here is that integration is not about keeping grief front and center forever. It is about making room for grief as a permanent, honored thread in the fabric, the larger picture of who you are, so that moving forward does not feel like abandoning the loss, that chapter, that significant element of your life and your story. This is the part of Life After Loss Academy where so many grieving people realize that moving forward and honoring loss, they're not opposite things. They're not fighting. They can both be happening at the same time. And it's also an opportunity to get really, really creative of how do you want to carry your loss, your person, forward into the future with you, because you can insist that it happens. That is your right as a griever. And so you get to create how that goes. That can give you so much of your power back at a time in your life when it can feel like grief has really taken everything away from you. Number 4 in the grief method framework is establish. This is navigate relationships and set boundaries with other people while grieving. The first 3 sections, ground, release, and integrate, are all about doing grief with you. The 4th section, establish, is about doing grief with others, because as I like to say, grief never, ever, 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 ever happens in a vacuum. Loss changes everything about your life, including your relationships with the people around you. Some people show up with tremendous care and consistency. Others more frequently disappear after the funeral or after the flowers die. Some people are real a-holes in grief and say things that leave you feeling more alone than companioned. And most people, even people who claim to love you and claim to support you, have their own weirdo discomforts with grief that can make it actually harder to get the support that you need in the aftermath of loss. So the establish section in the grief method framework is about creating grief honoring relationships. These are friendships, family dynamics, and workplace interactions that make room for and honor who you are now as a grieving person, not holding you to the standard of who you used to be before loss stormed through your life. This looks like setting kind but firm boundaries, not the punishing kind, but the compassionate kind. Things that say, I need you to show up differently for me, or I need this kind of conversation to stop, or I need this kind of conversation to start, or I need more time than I used to, or I need less time than I used to, or I need you to remember my loss even when you assume that I've moved on. In the established section of Life After Loss Academy, we work to identify your grief allies. These are people in your life who can actually hold space for your grief without flinching and leaning on them more deliberately, and also setting boundaries with people who have shown themselves to be hostile to your grief in ways where you can either put the relationship on pause or bring it to some kind of conclusion. What I want to make clear here is that establishing grief-honoring relationships is not about becoming difficult or demanding or like some sort of grief princess on a high horse. It is about recognizing that grief fundamentally changes all of your relationships. In my new book, Of Course I'm Here Right Now, I talk about how grief changes your rules of engagement with everyone in your life. And you are recognizing that all the relationships that you're in, from coworkers to your closest family, are filtered now through the lens of loss. We talk about in Life After Loss Academy, permanently wearing grief glasses. This is not a problem to be fixed. It is simply a new truth of your life that deserves space and honoring. And it really honors that, like, grief is never just happening to you and with you. It is also rippling out to all the relationships in your life. The last element of the grief method framework, F, is for foster. And this is find peace and joy again while living with grief. This step tends to be what my students call like the longest one, the lifetime one, because it never really ends. Fostering a long-term relationship with grief means sort of gear shifting the way you see grief itself or reframing it. Grief is no longer an enemy to defeat or a problem to solve. It is not a phase of your life or a season of your life to push through or get over as quickly as possible. Grief is, and we really drive it home in this section, a companion, a teacher, an unpleasant roommate, a permanent part of the landscape of your life. This section is where many of my clients and students begin to notice something surprising. It is glimmers of peace, or moments of laughter, or pockets of joy that coexist with the sadness of grief. These are not signs that grief is gone. They are signs that you are living alongside grief. So in the foster section, we talk about seeing your grief as a living thing that evolves and changes shape along with you. And it also means building your capacity to hold joy and sorrow, love and loss before and after all at once. It is very much a yes and section. It means fostering a lifetime partnership with grief means that accepting grief will still arrive in waves, sometimes years and decades down the road. But it also means knowing that when it does, you have the tools, the ritual, the community to meet your grief with compassion and even expecting it to arrive. Hello, Mr. Heartache, I've been expecting you, as one of my favorite songs from the Chicks goes, instead of dread. This is not the same as closure. There is no such thing as closure, as I spoke about in a previous episode of Grief Grower and wrote about on my blogs. You can go find that by searching Shelby Forsythia Closure. But there is integration, there is folding in, there is meaning making, and there is a life that is full and rich and beautiful and profound to you. It is different than it was before, but it is full nonetheless. That is the goal of the foster section. Before we go, I want to offer you a note on the timeline of what it means to come back to life after loss. The grief method, the 5 sort of steps that I've laid out here, is not a linear checklist. This is not something you go through GRIEF all in order and then you're done. You do not graduate from the grief method. You do not complete any of these sections and then leave it behind, never to think of it again. The 5 steps in this framework sort of weave in and out of each other throughout your life with grief. You might find yourself circling back to the ground module after a really hard grief anniversary, or returning to release after a new loss maybe reopens things about an old one that you'd never even considered. None of this is a failure. This is grief being the living, breathing, lifelong companion that it actually is. There is no finish line. There is only the next step and your willingness to keep taking it, to keep practicing everything that you learn in the grief method framework. As we wrap up today, what I want to remind you of, especially if you are this listener who wrote this to me, what does it mean to come back to life after loss? How do I come back to life after loss? You do not have to figure out the whole road ahead of you. You do not have to know the entire rest of your life. You just need to take one step. You do not have to have life after loss figured out. I think, if anything, probably grief taught you that you can't figure it out. Because again, anything could happen to anyone at any time for any reason. And that is a very neutral statement. You could have horrible things happen to you with the same frequency and probability as you could have wonderful things happen to you. You do not have to know what life looks like from here. and you do not have to be further along somehow than you are right now. You just have to be willing in any sort of capacity, even very small, to take a step in the direction of your own survival in life after loss. This could be, like the ground module, establishing a tiny daily ritual, or release, allowing yourself to cry without a time limit. Establish, it could look like texting one person who actually gets it, a member of your Grief Allies community. Or integrate, considering one way you might fold loss into your life. The path back to feeling fulfilled and rebuilding after loss is never, ever, ever a straight line. But it is a path. It is a process. You are already on it. You are already doing it. I'd never want to call grief a journey because I know so many people don't like that. But like, people say, how do I come back to life after loss? And my answer is, you're already doing it. You're already doing it. It is not something you need to opt into. You can do it more consciously, sure, but you are already living life after loss. You are already returning to life after loss. And if you are looking for a guide, a community, this framework, GRIEF, ground, release, integrate, establish, foster, to help you navigate it, to wrap words around it, to have exercises for processing it, that is exactly what Life After Loss Academy is here for. I have designed a free 2-minute quiz to find out if you are ready to join Life After Loss Academy. There's less than 10 questions, and even if Life After Loss Academy turns out not to be your next best step, and I will be honest with you, there is a quiz result for yes and a quiz result for no, you will still receive resources for coping with grief and coming back to life after loss again. And you can find the link to that quiz in the show notes. I hope this has helped you get a better grasp of what it looks like, what it actually means to come back to life after any sort of devastating loss. I'm so glad to have joined you today. That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're looking for grief support beyond this show, you can find free workshops, blog articles, and my new book, Of Course I'm Here Right Now, 3 actually helpful things to say to someone grieving, at shelbyforsythia.com/links. And if you'd like to get support from me for your unique loss experience, you can get in Life After Loss Academy, my online course and community. As a student, I will walk you through the 5-step grief framework for rebuilding after loss, and you can get live coaching with me every single week to answer your questions. Replays are always available if you can't attend live. If today's show felt validating, comforting, educational, or otherwise helpful to you, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. Grief Grower is hosted by me, Shelby Forsythia, with theme music composed by Addie Goldstein. Until next time, Grief Growers, I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.